Welcome to Conversations on the Coast, San Francisco's premier author interview program. And today we are happy to have with us Mary McGarry Morris, a novelist who's written several novels. But we're going to talk today about her latest one called The Lost Mother, published by Viking Penguin. Thanks for stopping by.
Well, thank you, Jim.
When I read your background, it says here you're a critically acclaimed novelist, and this is your sixth novel. Your first one, Vanished, was nominated for both the PEN/Faulkner Award and the National Book Award. Songs in Ordinary Time had a little run on the Oprah Book Club.
Certainly did.
Which is always very good for sales, and it was a national bestseller. According to Publishers Weekly, Lost Mother, in typical Morris fashion, paints a brutal landscape and authentic characters with delicacy and precision, once again proving that Morris is a storyteller of great compassion, insight, and depth. And then it goes on to say it's inspired by your own family history, which we can, get back to at some other time. Now, all of that is interesting, I think, but it does not bring up what I believe is one of the most unusual aspects of the book. The narrator, the voice of this book, is 12-year-old Thomas.
Yes.
That is different, isn't it?
It's different from my other novels. In Songs in Ordinary Time, it told the story at various times through various voices, and some of them were children. But in this novel, I felt it was very important to tell this particular story from the viewpoint of a child, because there's a mystery in this novel.
Yeah.
And
it also gets me angry from time to time,
yes.
in the sense that, why doesn't he see the full picture? And why does he continue to be optimistic about the families getting back together? Then you have to say, oh, now wait a minute, that's appropriate.
That would be just the way a child would treat it. Children never realize the full depth of what's going on around them, the good or the bad, and they're always hopeful. No matter how awful things get, a child always hopes and prays that things will get better.
It's really a great thing, isn't it?
It is, to be a child, I know.
to have children around to deliver optimism constantly.
Right, to look at the world that way.
Was it hard to write in that voice?
It was. It
was obviously different, but was it?
It wasn't hard. No, in fact, this book was a great joy to write, and it was a wonderful place to be during the writing in the hearts and minds of children.
I think that giving the voice to this young character, I know somehow gave me a sense of immediacy of being on the inside of the story somehow. Maybe that was the simplicity of the way he reveals things. I don't know.
Well, particularly because he was questioning everything, always trying to solve the mystery of where his mother had gone, why she had gone. The adults in the novel don't tell him what has happened. They keep it from him. His own father keeps that hope alive by saying that his mother will be back, that it's temporary. She's only gone away for a little while. And I think the father believes that wants to believe it, like the children in the beginning.
I think he does. Yeah.
Yes,
I think he does. You write at one point, and this is Thomas. His father's despair was terrifying. His father was the strongest man he knew. If he couldn't cope with the forces against them, then who could? What would become of them? Thomas lay very still, arms over his head. No wonder his mother had left. He would, too, if he could, if he had some place to go, and if Margaret would come with him. And that phrase at the end, if Margaret could come with him, if Margaret could do this, if Margaret could do that, that suggests everything about that relationship, which is what you would expect between a brother and a sister. She's 8, he's 12, and she's a pain in the neck.
She is. She's a wonderful pain in the neck, though. Yeah. He loves her deeply, and he's terrifically annoyed by her. She can be very pesky. She gets into trouble. She thwarts his plans. She gets him into trouble. And he sees her as the great cause of a lot of their problems, as he sees himself.
She's what we used to call, I'll give you away my age, what we used to call a chatterbox.
A chatterbox, no, I
always
know that.
Always speaking, even though she doesn't know whether it's the appropriate time to speak. And so that's what she is. So there we are with the sense of what this book is going to be all about, because we know who's speaking, but our listeners always want to know something about the plot, and they complain. So when we come back, more of the story of the lost mother.
Now you can find this program on iTunes, SoundCloud, and all your favorite digital outlets. Follow the show on Twitter at Jim Foster COC and email jimfostercoc@gmail.com.
This is Conversations on the Coast. I'm Jim Foster. Our guest today, Mary McGarry Morris. We have a lot of authors this month with 3 names, and I always have to slow up. Mary McGarry Morris, who's written a wonderful novel called The Last Mother, published by Viking Penguin. Now, as I said as we went into the break, our listeners always want to get some of the story told during an interview like this. And one of the aspects that's mentioned in the press material is that the story has some basis in your own life experience.
It does. When my mother was 4 years old, her mother got dressed up in her very best clothes and brought my mother to her friend's house in town and got in a taxi cab, drove away, and left my mother's life forever. My mother and her siblings.
Oh, my God.
Yes, and it was during the Depression. It was very painful for my mother.
There's something interesting about that, and it happens in your novel as well, and in my background, that she was she thought and was able to leave somebody off at somebody else's house and go away. And in your book, people are reaching out, sometimes for not good reasons, to help take care of these children whose father is unemployed, whose mother has disappeared. And in my background, there are stories of the Depression about how people helped one another. And no matter what they did, as I was growing up, we could never speak ill of them because of what they had done in the past. So in those terribly hard times, there was a different sense of friendship and community than we have now.
There were great debts.
Yeah.
And how do you repay that kind of a debt? Certainly at that time, they couldn't be repaid in any way but by helping your neighbor, by doing the best you could. If you could send over food or take in a child, whatever you could do, you do.
So your book has that aspect to it of how people in the Depression would help people. The 2 kids here seem to be beyond help, it seems to be. I mean, as I said, the father is totally unemployed. His big job was running around slaughtering other people's animals, and they were running out of them. And the mother had disappeared, and the kids at the beginning are living in a tent.
Well, the father had lost his home, and this novel takes place during 1933, which was really the worst time of the Depression, when this type of thing was really speeding up. People were losing their homes. They were without work. And the children, yes, they were in very desperate straits, and they were indeed living in a tent through the warm weather. Of course, with cold weather approaching, things become even more desperate.
And at that time, they were also enjoying something, being able to row and fish on the Black Pond.
As children would.
Yeah.
Again, going back to what you said about the optimism, that children will enjoy whatever's happening. If they're in a bombed-out crater, I'm sure they'll have fun in the rubble. They're children.
I want to get to a review that we were talking about during the intermission from the Chicago Tribune. It says in part, written in a distant past tense, The Lost Mother offers readers very little breathing room. The tragedy feels near and absolute. One wants to turn away but can't. Morris, who has written about the fictional swath of this fictional swath of country before, focuses her lens on a single family story. And that's wonderful, and that's very important. But one understands that the desperation here is to be extrapolated beyond these pages to real families enduring the indignities of poverty, to any family that has suffered the excruciations, a word I never heard of utter, unexplained abandonment. It's not a pleasant book, but writing pleasantries was not Morris' intention. Now, the thing that I'm interested in asking you is, what about that extrapolation? Does that make any sense to you?
Oh, it sure does. The plight of families, particularly in that time, is known to many of us. And since the book has come out, I've heard so many personal stories of people for whom this is so familiar. But yes, even now today it goes on. The abandonment of children is probably terrible right now. Parents whose lives are messed up by drugs, divorce, those kinds of things, of course they continue.
So that in a sense, story you're telling, you could say it's caused by the Great Depression, and yet the problems and the hurts that you talk about are with us still today.
I think it's a universal, yes, always.
You know, The Lost Mother is one of those books where the characters in it just stick in your mind. And I want to look at some of them and announce a really big surprise when we come back.
Now you can find this program on iTunes, SoundCloud, and all your favorite digital outlets. Follow the show on Twitter at Jim Foster COC and email jimfostercoc@gmail.com.
Mary McGarry Morris. She's the author. The title is The Lost Mother. This is Conversations on the Coast. And one of the places where this book has been reviewed already is the Boston Globe, and they say an ambitious writer. How about that? Ambitious.
Very nice.
I don't know that we've ever had an ambitious writer here before. Is not afraid to tackle the hardest parts, and in her epic novel, Songs in Ordinary Time, she proved that she can take on a whole town and bring it alive in the most affecting ways. Now, in her sixth novel, The Lost Mother, she has narrowed her scope and gone back in time. More important, she has matured. Her prose has a lighter, surer touch that will attract not only her fans, but also those who may have found her earlier work repetitive and heavy-handed. Its excruciating details, that is, in this novel, will stay in the mind long after we have closed this absorbing and wonderful book. And that's, to me, is one of the great properties of Lost Mother, that you close the book and you don't get away from it. It stays with you. And I love it for that. Now, the other thing that I love is that we can now make this important surprise announcement. Next week on our show, we are going to have the editor of The Lost Mother, and she has been the editor for the works of Mary McGarry Morris for how long?
Since my first novel, Vanished, was published in 1988, of course, Catherine Court worked with me on the novel before then.
Her name is Catherine Court,
yes.
Right? Okay. So she is going to be with us, with you, next week. We've never had that before. We've never had the opportunity, in a sense, to look inside the publishing business, or at least this component of it, the relationship between writer and editor. And we're really looking forward to that. So next week, everybody tune in, call your friends, gather around the radio, because we're going to have quite a show. Now, many of the characters in Lost Mother seem to want to help Thomas and Margaret. So let's talk about some of those proposed helpers. a kind of marginal character, but I think beautifully drawn. And I don't even know how to pronounce his name. Bebo,
yes.
Bebo. And he's known throughout the book until like 3 pages from the end simply as
Old
Bebo.
Yes.
What's his interest in these children?
Well, actually, old Bebo his main focus is in the father, Henry Talcott. He wishes Henry were his son-in-law. He's very disappointed that Henry didn't marry his daughter, Gladys Bebo.
Whom he describes at one point as plug ugly.
Yes, his own daughter. Yes. Mm-hmm. He's a crotchety man who can be very cruel at times, cruel to his own daughter.
Yeah.
And he makes life difficult for the children, too, when they come into the Bebo home, because Gladys, his daughter, wants very much to help the children.
Uh-huh. And that Gladys wants nothing out of helping. She's, I think, the most altruistic of the proposed helpers.
Gladys is a very good woman.
There's another woman who's, always there and doesn't really come on the scene till near the end of the book, and that's the lost mother.
Yes, Irene.
Yeah. Talk about her.
Well, the way I felt about Irene was that she probably never really wanted to be a mother, and that she wasn't very good at it.
Mm-hmm.
Parenting wasn't her thing, certainly. And though she loved her children, it wasn't a satisfying life at all for her. And I don't think her children ever felt that when she was home with them, but she certainly passed that on once she left.
And at some point, the children catch up with her.
Yes.
In a town in Massachusetts. They're living in a place called Denton, Vermont. Is that the name?
Belton.
Belton,
they set
Vermont.
out to find their mother. Yes, they're determined. That's and part of it again is the mystery, the fact that no one will tell them what she's doing down in Massachusetts. She's gone down to a mill town there to find work. That's the most that they know, and they have an address from an envelope that they've come upon.
And they find her.
And they do find her.
And here is how they think of her. In a loved one's beauty, there is solace, comfort in its presence, and the hope, no, the belief, the certainty that possession of so fine an ornament might be sustenance enough. Here it was at last, the object of all yearning for the children. They stared, relieved. She was more beautiful than ever before. Her dark, loose hair fell softly about her face. Her deep-set eyes were startlingly bright, bluer than the clearest sky, her cheekbones high, her long, imperious nose perfect, her skin milky beneath the high color of her emotions, her wide mouth full and parting easily with suggestion, promise, hope of a smile. That's the way the kids saw her, even though she had run out on them, even though, as you say, she probably never wanted to be a mother. And when she lost that one child to sickness, that was it. Catherine Court, editor and president of Penguin Books and publishers of Plume, together with Mary McGarry Morris, they'll be here next week to talk to us about the behind-the-scenes work in publishing, talk about the author-editor relationship, and much more. You don't want to miss it. This has been Conversations on the Coast, and I'm Jim Foster.
Now you can find this program on iTunes, SoundCloud, and all your favorite digital outlets. Follow the show on Twitter at JimFosterCoc and email JimFosterCoc@gmail.com.